Welcome to Legacy Conversations, recorded right here at the barn on Collimer Road. I'm your host, Mark Modulewski. Our mission, to educate, inspire, and entertain. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Jeffrey, welcome to Legacy Conversations.
It's a pleasure, Mark.
Absolutely. Why not? You know, I mean, it takes place like 15 feet from your desk, so.
It's not a long drive. The commute's short.
Commute is short, yeah.
I appreciate that. Though.
Yeah.
So, but...
well, thanks for spending some time. I wanted to give a little bit of background on how you and I met, and then talk a little bit about how we got to here. So I vaguely remember when we met, but do you remember?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So
tell me a story.
It will be a story. So working at New England Financial, Phil Kessler is our general agent, and Larry Ships is our kind of mentor and so forth. And at the time I was working in, you started in 1999, if I recall.
99, yep.
So it's probably, and I started working at Haylard Fryer & Co. in 1996. I say working at, I was at New England Financial since 1983, got in the management business, then got out of it. And talking to Phil, I said, hey, I'd like to really have an opportunity to work at a property and casualty firm that he was locally talking to about putting one of our financial advisors in their place, in their office, physically located so that they could kind of cross-sell.
Yeah.
With that said, working with them since 1996, and I always go back every a couple times a week, talk to Larry Ships about cases, particularly business cases, retirement plans, and so forth. Long story longer is in talking about, then you came on board and started working with Larry and Phil, and it's probably about 2 years in, probably about 2001, that Larry said, you know what? So I was asking Larry a lot of questions, and sometimes, it takes me 2-3 times to really get the details and the concepts down. And he said, you might want to kind of work with Mark, bring in Mark Modulewski at the time. I think I just met you a few times. And so that kind of is how we kind of connected. It's really through Larry. I got to give him a lot of kudos. And he said, I think your personalities will work out great. Mark's very analytical, detailed, knows his stuff, great memory, and to boost your head. I used to call you the resource guy because it seems like you learn something and you kind of remember it and so forth. So that's how then we just kind of, slowly but surely, I would bring you on a case, for a retirement plan or so forth, and it kind of worked from there, And we did a case-by-case basis, It's kind of one of those things we kind of worked on, is that let's see how it goes. We didn't have any formal agreement as far as, how things go in compensation or whatever, but that's really how the relationship is really, Larry Ships, I think, kind of merged us together.
Yeah, I think so. I remember starting early, didn't know anything about anything.
Right.
Larry was a big mentor of mine, and he was trying to get me in front of good people, right?
Right.
And that was the hardest part that I had.
Right.
And you
being relatively new to the area.
Yeah. And you were born and raised here, right?
Correct.
So you're a JD kid, right?
Yep. JD's went to Syracuse University. So I knew just being in a relatively small city, town, suburbs, you kind of just know people, names. So, and name recognition, it helps get in the door.
Yeah.
You friend, your brother, father, whatever type might be. So that helped, and that was one of the things that I think the connection is like I could, and then through this local property and casualty firm that I got some business leads, and that was my motivation, is to really want to get more in depth into the business market. I was again since 1983 when I started with Phil and Larry at New England Financial, was primarily the personal market, and that was fine. I was that's my meat and potatoes. From that, there's a couple personal clients that turned into nice business owners and to this day very successful. So, but I want to get more and more into it. So with understanding that, hey, if I can, and this is what I think the local property and casualty firm also wanted, a little cross sell. So it worked out great because you come in and again, you knew the detail. Again, this is probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe let's see, 2004 or 5 and so forth. And it's started with one case that was a small firm, and to this date was probably one of our largest, best clients. And ironically, they're getting ready to sell the business.
Yeah, again, yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, very different, right? So you grew up as the youngest of 4 brothers,
right.
born and raised in the suburbs of Syracuse, went to Syracuse University, got into the financial advising business back there. Back then, it was a big focus on insurance. It was insurance heavy.
Yep.
I was driving a milk truck when I moved back here with my wife and
That's
my
right.
kid, with Tyler. And then I interviewed with a bunch of folks, met Larry Ships, thought something was different about him. And then through that, we became friends. We started working on some stuff, had some similar skills, but some different skills. New England got sold to MetLife. MetLife got
2000.
sold to Mass Mutual.
Yep.
So we lived through that. And at some point, we made the decision to work a little bit more closely together because there was a bunch of time where instead of us running independently and just getting on a couple of cases here and there, we started to get more involved in each other's practices.
Right, exactly.
A bunch of changes happened with the offices and the agencies and the general agents. I had some partnerships that worked and then didn't work, and you were kind of always there with us, with me. And, we started to do what we have always done, but just started DBA, right, which was Legacy a while back.
Yep.
And while we had staff, it wasn't as formal as I think. We started with
just
Anita.
our staff either.
Yeah, it was always shared.
Right.
And we decided to hire someone else, which was Anita, and then we hired Nicole, which was a big part of our practice, especially over the last 8-9 years.
Exactly.
And that led to someone, Hannah, who's no longer with us, but helped us get through some stuff. Anita retired. We hired Jesse. We hired Keegan.
Yep.
And now you look back, and over the last decade, we went from the last 20 years occasionally working to working on a day-to-day basis to now having a team of people.
Right.
And I think that's kind of neat. Tell me about how has the industry changed? Like in 1983, 1985, 1990, you would get up and go to work.
Right.
Compared to you getting up and going to work today.
Rather drastically, well, I mean, it's a strong word, but it was always a segment in the industry, insurance and financial investment firms, so forth. They kind of were separated. They, the big brokerage houses did the investments, and we did the insurance. And when I say insurance, I should probably specify more life insurance, disability, maybe some health plans there. So that was kind of when I first got in the business. I was trained, licensed, and to be a life insurance salesman. Okay. But then shortly after, all of a sudden, insurance companies started getting into the investment in having their own mutual funds and so forth. So New England Financial actually had a phenomenal New England growth fund managed by Ken Hebner. I'll never forget his name, and he did phenomenal in that. So that was our big push into the investment world. So that was probably 3 years in. So that was through the late 80s. And then I noticed that, to answer your question, as far as the firms, the industries kind of started merging, where all of a sudden the big brokerage firms, investment firms, were all of a sudden selling insurance too.
Yep.
And so we were selling investments, it was cross-selling. And then through the 90s, it was consolidation in the insurance, or the life insurance. When I say insurance, I should say life insurance versus property and casualty insurance, which we never got into. Merging those, practices and so forth, and all of a sudden, in a consolidation of some companies. And now, with that, my business went from approaching clients as life insurance and disability planning and some basic retirement planning to kind of more investment retirement planning over the last 2-3 decades, especially. So, where my income was probably initially 95% insurance sales. It kind of is now flipped. Now 95% of my businesses or compensation is from investments, so fee-based investments, and the advisory, and with that, going into from 2010 or around that, where you and I now have been working together for a good 4, 5, 6 years, and we went to, I think, a local SALU, or stand for Syracuse Association of Life Underwriters meeting, a monthly meeting. They have speakers and would talk, and one of them was actually a fee-based planner, and it's kind of ironic because you and I are sitting at the table and listening to this guy. It's like, all right, we're all commission-based, people sitting in this room. Here's this fee-based guy saying this is really the wave and where to go. And coincidentally, I was talking to some very good, friends of mine who were in the brokerage or investment firms, and that's where they were going. They were in the brokerage firms. Were going from commission-based transaction type sales to fee-based, flat fee-based, and then we're there anytime to talk to the client and help them out, and being a more of a fiduciary capacity. And that's where kind of you and I kind of light bulb went off and said, we're kind of already doing that with some of the with retirement plans that we had put in place where they were slash commission slash fee based. And so I was getting kind of used to that, saying, all right, I can see where you can build this up, and that's where it's gone since then. Is that we've kind of been more fee based and planning, and with that holistic planning, we can bring to the client the value added of doing retirement plans and so forth, and knowing that we're getting compensated for it as long as we can have their investments. We can manage their investments.
Yeah, I think I came in the business obviously a little after you, but it was still that tail end of there was three sides of the financial services business.
Right.
There was brokerage, the Merrill Lynch, the stockbrokers, the people that were managing wealth. There was the bankers who did checking, savings, mortgages, right, CDs, that type of stuff. And then there was the insurance agents. We would all call ourselves financial advisors, but we all focused on different things.
Correct.
And over the last 20 years in particular, kind of like the store that just sells gas now sells bread, right? So you go to an Easy Mart or something. It's like, well, grocery stores were the only one that sold groceries.
Right.
Well, in the financial services world, it was all of a sudden you went to your Merrill Lynch broker and they brought in a life insurance person.
Correct.
So the industry has changed. So you certainly have people who focus on investments or focus on insurance, or focus on banking, but everybody tries to do a little bit of everything.
As I was saying earlier, when I worked for the local property casualty firm, or worked with, I should say. I always still had my affiliation with New England Financial at the time. Was just that. It was a cross-selling. It was they realized that, all right, they took care of all the liability, property insurance, and this and that, but they could really tie that client in if all of a sudden they could get some of their financial investments, whether it be a retirement plan, a health plan, whatever. So they saw that too, property casualty firms. So, is to branch out and encompass, the all everything shop, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think what it did over time, especially with our little firm here, is it changed the culture of the way in which we saw people, right?
Correct.
So we always care about the client and the consumer, but in a commission-based environment, the focus is how can I help you? And if I do help you, I get paid.
Right.
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 And now people engage with us, play a flat fee based on what's invested, and if there's anything else around that, it is what it is, right? Like we help them. So everybody who's a customer and a client isn't really worrying about, well, how do I compensate Jeff if I haven't bought anything recently?
Right.
So it changes it. So you look, you're a fiduciary, but you have the ability to give advice based on what's best for the client in all scenarios, right? There's nothing leading you towards anything else. So over the last couple of years, the business has changed significantly. I specifically remember you saying to me once, Mark, I'm not going to be here forever, and I'm hoping that you're my succession. So I want you to meet some of these other folks because I'm a little over a decade younger. So it kind of worked, right? Because we have a lot of the same hobbies, which we'll talk about, and we went and we had your practice valued, right? Because at some point it's like, well, how do you sell it? This is a long time ago, maybe 7-8 years ago.
Yep.
And they came back with some number, and I gave you some smart-ass remark that's like, that's great, I'll never buy it for you. Right. It's like, yeah, that's fantastic that we paid
price
somebody.
Is only as good as the buyer.
as the person who wants to do it.
Right.
And the main reason was because the way in which we used to work, even me, the first 8-10 years of the business, we didn't have a CRM, a client relation management system.
Yep.
We didn't have a way to track the different products. Everything would be a specific website or a specific number. We didn't have a central location. We didn't have a process. We didn't have recurring revenue that was there regardless of whether we were there. So we spent a lot of the last 15 years, specifically the last 10 years, designing a practice so that if you're not here for a week or I'm not here for a week, the practice keeps going. Advice can keep going.
Right.
Revenue flows. Clients can be taken care of.
Right.
As different needs pop up, we can help them with it. There's an urgency to move at the pace that the client wants to, not our urgency on how it moves.
Yep.
So now all of a sudden the value of your business from 8, 10 years ago is significantly more than it was back then.
Right.
Probably, I don't know, probably double what that number was.
I got it. Yeah.
Just because of the way we've started to reorganize.
Well, I'm saying it's probably quadruple, but that's
Yeah.
where we'll
Well, you
discuss
could
it.
say quadruple. Yeah, exactly. You could say whatever you want. But it's changed, right?
Right.
Because now,
Yep.
when we first started, you were solving problems for individuals, and then you got into the business market, and now we run a business, we run a practice, right? And that practice is very different than
Right.
waking up January 1st and saying, who else needs some additional insurance?
Correct.
Just like the Merrill Lynch guys, who there aren't Merrill Lynch guys anymore, but
Right.
those guys who would wake up and be like, who else has some money they want to give me today?
Right, right.
Want to invest it for.
Right.
What's the now that so I would say you're in the, if there's quarters, if your career is built into quarters, right? You're probably in the fourth quarter of your career,
No
right?
doubt. Yep.
And whether that's 5 years or 25 years or whatever the number is, they're like it's the last quarter of
Right.
you doing that. What's the new stage of life look like? Being an advisor for 30 years and you're in that last part.
Good outlook. I mean, it's kind of, I envision, when we get in this business, you always, again, 1983, I'm dating myself, but went to some, company seminars and speakers, and he said, set goals, for, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and, years from now, 30 years from now, I hope to be alive, okay, but, goal one. But, really, but one of the things I remember writing down was, when I'm retiring, phasing out a nice, business at 55 to 60. Because at the time, you're 25 years old, and you're grinding, you're waking, you're putting in 12-hour days. Believe it or not, even I put in 12-hour days
No
back
doubt.
then. Raising a family, little kids, having night appointments, and that was back when internet was not even, starting.
Just
It's
started,
just
yeah.
starting, but people didn't have phones, smartphones or Zoom or team meetings and all these things that you can do virtually now. And so you had to be in front of the people and so forth. So it was a lot of long hours. My wife can attest to that. So a lot of family time away. It sound more to now where here I am 40 plus 5 years in this business, in the industry, and I am at a point in time where I can work with our team and so forth, with you were saying earlier, efficiencies of our practice and so forth, and technology, that I can literally be anywhere and still be client engaged, be in other words, a phone call away or a Zoom meeting away and so forth. So that's the real nice part of it. So I'm kind of, as I'm phasing out, Kinley said to you, probably we really decided, I don't know, by 8, 9, 10 years ago that, having worked with other advisors and so forth and sharing administration or team players, and staff, and saying, "Hey, let's go on our own. Let's do this thing." Let's. I saw in you that, hey, you had a lot of organizational skills and so forth, and a drive and so forth. And so, why are we just kind of, working with other people? Let's work with ourselves. And with that, you put together a practice that it's made it a lot easier. That where I can literally, so-called hour-wise, can work part-time or half days. Yet at the same time, I could probably get more work done than when I used to put in their 10, 12-hour days, to the point where it's like, hey, I don't know if I really want to retire.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where I could be like the Aaron Rodgers, so you just
Still looking for a
still
team.
looking for a team, that's willing to, work with me and so forth. But all kidding aside, there's, times I want, I'm at age and so forth where probably about, I always say to you, we're constantly talking that maybe 3, 4 years away, like to a certain late 60s and so forth, and then phase out, maybe continue to work with some my good clients. At the same time, it'll be a transition over to getting them comfortable with working with the team, which they kind of already are,
Sure.
because it's a team concept. They call, and they're not just like calling me for a service request now. They're talking to either Nicole or Keegan, or if you're available. So that's good, and that was always my concern with clients, is because I used to see it in the past with prior advisors.
We don't have to use his last name, but like Eddie.
Yeah,
Remember Eddie way
oh
back
my
when?
God. Eddie, God bless him. Good old Eddie, who was, worked till 75, and he was, 75% deaf and so forth, and he used to just scream at the phone because he had to.
He had to. Couldn't hear anything else.
And everybody in the office could hear him, and he was like just yelling at his client, "What are you doing, you stupid idiot?" I was like, oh, wow. Larry, I remember we were talking to Larry, Larry would say, "No, that's not really the way you want to do it." But right, and to that point was because the advisors didn't have that support and didn't have a transition or so forth. So it's like they had to be there. If they weren't there, nobody took care of the client and so forth. So I always envisioned that, hey, that would be in a place where, hey, somebody like yourself, an advisor, they would take over the business. And that's just, that the client wouldn't know the person until also the next day, all of a sudden, Jeff retired, all of a sudden, here's this Mark Modulewski. Who's this guy? Because I understand, that, look, it's relationships, and developing those relationships, and their clients are comfortable. So they obviously have a relationship with me, but they don't necessarily have it with you. Well, we've done that for the last 8 years now, where they see your name on statements, and they see the team, and they've been to our office, and they see how we work. So I feel comfortable in that if I did walk even tomorrow, it's fully retired and so forth, that they'd be in good hands. So that helps.
And that's what, the compliment to me is, you and I have spoken for the last, let's call it 8 years, that within 5 to 7 years you'd be done. And every year it's like, well, 5 to 7.
Aaron Rodgers.
Right. And the idea behind it is we want to make it so comfortable, but you don't feel like, well, I need to do it. Right. And make it easy enough to still support clients and do things the way you want to do it. So that's the compliment that says, well, I don't feel like I need to get out, because I can keep going, and there's some value there. I think the world's changed a little bit. I think, it used to be like the goal was, hey, retire at 55, and then you hit 55 and be like, well, it's not really all that old.
Right.
And then it was like, well, grandma and grandpa had to retire at 65 because when you're 65, you're super old. And you look around and all your friends are 65 and you're like, don't feel that old.
And at that point, Social Security
it was maxed out at 65 or 66. And
Social Security was designed back in the Great Depression, where it was only supposed to last 5 years because people only lived 5 years longer.
That far, right.
Yeah, exactly.
But now it's almost like, 62 or 65 is like 70 is the new 62 or 65. Correct. People, as long as they have their mind and their health, they want to keep going. In our practice, you try to make a commitment to that individual or to that family for life. The challenge is whose life, right? Because if you meet somebody who's 40 and you're helping them doing some basic financial planning, pretty good chance that you're not going to be around as long as they are.
Right.
So being able to transition that piece is important. And a lot of our industry looks a little bit like you and me, right? A lot of them are between like 60 and 75.
Yep.
So the transition of those businesses, whether they're in banking or brokerage or financial advising or insurance, they're about a lot of older folks in their fourth quarter trying to figure out how do you transition those relationships.
Right.
So I think it's pretty interesting. I think we always had this goal to design our practice so that we had a good team. We relieve the stress of the day-to-day piece, be able to be excellent in what we do, but understand that, we're not perfect. Sometimes we make mistakes and it doesn't happen perfectly, but we can provide expert advice and meet the client where they need to be. And there's some continuity in what we're doing, right?
Yep.
Part of that is that piece, like long-term, where all of a sudden something happens to you and you can't work for 6 months or 8 months or can't work ever again, or you're not around, God forbid. And vice versa for me, if I go away and I'm gone, if I'm out of the office for 2 weeks at a time, I can still engage with our team. I can still engage with clients. But clients don't feel like, I need to be sitting in a desk, staring at my phone and my computer every day, 9 to 5 to service what's going on. And I think we've done a pretty good job organizing that piece.
Absolutely.
So when you think back over your career, it's been more than 3 decades, believe it or not, right? In this type of business. Yep. What are a couple of things that stand out?
The grind early and it was a payoff that was worth it. But it was a grind because you're starting, and you were brand new to the area. So, you alluded to this earlier, you didn't really know a lot of people. You'd moved here from, Connecticut College with your wife and so forth. And so at the same time, I knew people, but I didn't necessarily know a lot, okay, as far as getting the door. So what I learned is just the relationship. I think in most of the clients that we have, it even said this to us. I said, look, I can't trust you guys.
Yeah.
And that takes time. That's not something that, hey, I'm Jeff Chapman, like this,
Yeah.
talking about helping you out. If I can sell you something great, okay?
Yeah.
And I think that's where the industry is changed, and people were a little, concerned about, all right, what's this guy selling today?
Yeah.
What's the latest, hottest thing, okay? And transaction sales, commission sales, and that has morphed to planning now. And in the past we did some planning, but we kept in the back of our minds like, yeah, I got to sell this person something, otherwise I did a lot of time and effort for $0. I got to put food on the table.
And it's not that the
myself.
products are bad, and it's not that they didn't solve needs, but
Right.
you ended up you're planning to
based-
identify a need to solve the
Exactly.
need, right?
Exactly. So I like the whole concept of then taking that, but then if I can get paid while I'm doing this, and we actually got into fee-based, planning where we did, so for some.
I remember pushing you to say, let's not take the upfront, let's try to take some of the trail stuff.
And let's start training sales, but also we actually fee-based, where
Yeah.
we actually did a formal, for business owners, I can probably say a half a dozen of them. That continued to be very good clients of ours to this date.
Yeah.
So that was good. It was, you were at the time you were manager, sales manager at Knowing Financial, so you're kind of promoting this to the agency, and I was sitting in all those weekly meetings at the time, and so I bought into it, and it was a lot of time and effort, analytical stuff that I'm not real analytical at, but I understand. I want to understand a concept before I can promote it, okay? And if it's right for the client or not. I'm a big believer in, just don't shove it down someone's throat if it's not right for them. And with that, it kind of opened up my knowledge and so forth that much more. But with that, then understanding that, right, that we can ongoing, if we get some of their investments, insurances, things that are going to be cyclical as far as fee-based and revenue generation, then I can afford to spend more time with that client and answer their questions and sit down and not feel that, great, love talking to you, but I'm not making a dime off of you right now because in the old world, it was a commission base where pretty much it was the upfront commission and so forth. You got a little trail, but not enough to live on. And so you're always promoting, trying to buy something, or selling something new. And with that, the clients, I think, feel more comfortable with that. Right, they're in it for our sake, the fiduciary, and what's suitable and so forth. And we are held under a much greater standard now with being a fiduciary advisor, with suitability for the investment product, whatever that's necessary for the client. Versus in the old days, it was kind of commission based and buyer beware. You bought it and so forth, and you might be ticked off down the road, but. And with that, there's a few bad apples that happened in the industry, came out of that. And that's not what I wanted to do or become. So I'm glad this has gone this way, and I really feel comfortable now in working with people. So, but the answer, the main thing was building those relationships with the client, and then being able to afford to continue the relationships and with them and spend the time with them, and therefore that's the value added. So that the client feels that, I'm paying this ongoing fee, but Jeff and Mark are there all the time. A phone call away to come over. Whether it be 5, 6, 7, 8 times a year. Okay,
right.
Versus before it was like maybe once every couple of years I'd hear from them. So
I've always felt. I think when I first started. I felt like what gave me confidence was knowledge, right? It was that analytical part. And now that I've been doing it for a while, what gives me confidence is the relationship part.
Right.
Having people understand that the people that we engage with are just like us, understanding what's important to them. Just today, I sent an email to a longtime client, and we're talking about the taxability of her buying a house from her dad after her mom passed, and then when dad passed, splitting it between her and her sister, and how that's different. So I can spend time giving advice because that's what's the right thing to do. And in the past, it was hard. It was harder to do that.
Right.
But now we're answering questions on how to fill out FAFSA and whether should I rent or buy, or should I lease a car? Should I buy a car?
Right. Yeah.
What's happening with interest rates? My cousin's brother has this product over there. What do you think of it? But you're able to provide a service
Correct.
that's in this financial advice, financial planning, financial consulting world, And then for me in particular, advising business owners on what's going on. How do you attract and retain employees? How
Right.
do you deal with your estate plan? What happens if you die too soon? What happens if you live too long?
Right.
All of that type of stuff.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that's what I was conveying to my clients. Like, call me for anything now. I can comfortably say that have been for the last, 15 years being, fee-based and revenue, ongoing revenue is that call me for anything. It's a mortgage. I know
Yeah.
people in the business.
Yeah.
My brother was in the business, mortgage, finance business for, 30 plus years. So, I have a lot of, I know a lot of stuff, not in great detail, but
You have
enough
a
to
network of people,
correct.
plus you have
Attorneys,
a lot of knowledge and a
accountants.
bunch of little things, right?
And just dealing with it day to day, that you
Yeah.
learn, you pick this stuff up. So, and I always said, look, I'm not your accountant or your attorney, but at the same time, I can explain a concept to them that might make some sense. It will intrigue them to say, oh yeah, let's take it a step further, okay? And then that's when I interact. For example, today, I just this morning had this. Dear old lady who's was a orphan client, orphan being, the previous financial advisor retired and so forth. That guy took over her accounts way back, by 15, 20 years ago, Greg.
Yep.
And she didn't have a lot of assets. She was a nice lady and so forth. And I would review with her. And she just still to this day, she's late 80s now. But even back, when I started working with her when she was like, say, 70, early 70s, she didn't have an email or, didn't know what that was all about. So I had to go out there and visit her, and, periodically. And morphed around, right? It came around to also reviewing her stuff by last fall and realized that, Mary should probably put some of this into protect it. Now she was a lady that never married, single. She had a dear friend right down the road, Janet, who was a good friend of hers, about her age, a couple years younger. And Janet had 2 adult children and so forth. And long story short is, I said, this money at my concern and looking at Mary and so forth. And even though Janet was her dear friend, would visit her every day and make sure she's all right, but she was kind of living on her own. I could see at some point in time, she may end up in a nursing home and so forth. So we talked about protecting some of their assets and setting up an irrevocable trust. And that concept, she said, I'm very interested because I don't want to go in a nursing home. I said, Mary, nobody does. But I said, the reality is, at some point in time, your dear friend Janet's not going to be able to take care of, right now, she's able to take care of all the things that you need as a, person, bathing and all that. But I could just see at some point she's going to probably need some help. So I said, let's start the planning process. And I said, where do you want these assets to go? I said, my concern is if you do end up in a assisted living or skilled nursing home, I said, then these assets are going to be gone pretty quickly within a year or 2. So I said, let's try it, where would you like it to go? I said, well, look, I don't have any children, and, any of my, relatives are all passed because of her age, so forth. So I'd like to leave it by Janet or to, her children who are, take care of me, and yada. Or we did that. We just sat down this morning and finalized the irrevocable trust with an attorney that I'd been working with over the years, and she's very grateful for that. So the next step is to get these assets in there and protection. The whole idea is that it's that comfort level that that she says, all right, that now we're kind of we're all set that if something happens to me, these assets are going at least in the right direction versus going to a nursing home and so forth. So I feel, and what did I get out of it? Yes, I have some investments already, so we're going to shift those over. Am I going to make any more money than what I'm currently making? No, but I feel good about the fact that, hey,
It's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do. It's what's right for the person, and so forth. And whether I get compensated or not, so be it. Okay, but I can afford to because of the fact that we have this, this fee-based planning. And this is what I always wanted to do, and not have to worry about paying the bills, personally. So
I mean, it's very interesting because ultimately, the people that I meet that I respect in our business, have some sort of focus or drive similar to what you just described, which is I want to build relationships with people. I want to help them solve their problems. I want to put them in good positions to do the things that they want to do.
Right.
And if something happens along the way, I want to make sure we're prepared for it.
Right.
And that's a professional job, right? And I think sometimes when I first started, I remember looking around going, I remember asking Larry, can you be a professional insurance agent? Like, what, isn't that an oxymoron? And he kind of laughed, because the idea was we're just out here. You're not saying that a husband and wife who has two kids doesn't need some insurance in case something happens, but
Sure.
it's kind of like here's a product we have that kind of fits your need. Maybe you should purchase it.
Right.
But realistically, the culture has changed, and we have worked really hard to get to a point where we can just do the things that are right and help the people that we can.
Right.
And to the opposite side, if there's folks who don't like the way we work, right, or don't have that relationship, have the permission slip now to shake hands and part friends. We don't do it very often,
Right.
but if there's things that we do that they don't really follow along with, there's no back end charge, there's no back end cost. You
Correct.
just pick it up.
Right.
It makes it as an easier gate to entry, right? Because
Yep.
it doesn't cost you this big chunk to get in, which means you can leave anytime. But when people don't feel like they're trapped, one of the reasons why I think people struggle to buy a car is because once they sign it on the line, they get it, it's gone, right? Like you're making a decision, you can't go back.
Yeah.
But you've got this professional person who you're hoping that their education and experience is going to provide you what you need. So, like our culture, explain to me. So, as the senior man on the team, right?
The old man on the team.
The old man on the team. I come to work when I wake up every day. I check emails. I think through what needs to happen. I look at my schedule because I don't necessarily put things on my schedule every day. You and I are a little different that way.
Yep.
Jesse helps me fill the schedule based on what's going on. And then I spend some of my time in marketing. I spend some of my time focusing on legacy process. I spend some of my time focusing on the staff, like the ladies in particular.
Yep.
I talk about the cases that we're working on that are pending, the service items that are there. And then I start thinking about the new opportunities that are going. In the past, that's not what happened. Your days are different, right?
Oh,
So
less complex.
fewer categories that you're thinking of every day, because it's focused on what's the next. It's focused on the clients that you have, making sure that they're taken care of going forward, that they have what they need. If there's new opportunities that pose themselves, being able to give the energy and focus to make that happen. And then it's a little bit about yourself and your wife and your kids and your life, which is a little. That's one of the reasons why I think it works, right? Because
So the pleasure part, again, I alluded to this earlier that I saw advisors, insurance agents, really good at what they did, and here they are grinding at their desk at 67, 68, 72 years old, doing some servicing mundane items, things, so forth, and just grinding it out and so forth, and not be able to get away and so forth, enjoy the fruits of their labor, so to speak, as often as I think they should. And so I'm able to do that now. As I said, before, I can probably get in a 4 or 6 hour day with appointments and whatever. And with our team, wonderful team staff, and I say it sincerely, they take care of all the mundane servicing stuff that I used to have to take care of myself in the earlier days. And they do a better job at it than I do too. And the clients appreciate it, get back to them and so forth. So I feel comfortable that I can get away and then do the travel. Here I am, mid-60s, and my wife's too, and we're still in pretty good health, mentally and physically. And I've always said this to I'm very open with my clients. Say, look, they say, "Oh, how long are you going to work?" I said, "Geez, way things are going, I might be here for another 10 years. Mark's not going to want to hear that.
Yeah.
He's going to, but all kidding aside, I could probably do this as long as I, can physically and more importantly, mentally." I said, if I start forgetting your name, I said, then maybe it's time to go.
That's when I'll have the conversation.
And
with you.
Mark will have to sit me down and have that conversation. So, all kidding aside, but in all sincerity, it's something we can do, and I see that. I see the people. I like to come to work and put in a couple, 4 or 5 hours. Some friends will probably chuckle, say, you're lucky you worked that in a week. Okay?
Yeah.
I used to, my brother, God bless him, he stole this from Saturday Night Live, but I think it was Will Ferrell did a skit and President Bush, second President George Bush, and he said, "Hey, my work is 24/7. 24 hours a week, 7 months of the year. So, and I used to laugh at it. I tell people that, but I said, in our practice now, with the way it's set up, I could do that. Am I going to get away from 5 months in a row? No, because then people say, "Oh, just retired. He's done."
Yeah.
Okay, he's marked there. But all kidding aside, the amount of work that we'd have to be there to the old school where you didn't have the internet and the smartphone. So, I used to dread actually going to vacation early, let's say first 20 years of my career, going away for a week. And you say, why would you dread going? I loved going away. I couldn't wait, anxious.
Yeah.
But in the last 3-4 days of that vacation, that 8-day vacation, it's like I started thinking, oh my God, the pile of phone calls and emails and things I got to get to because I didn't, you don't have that worry anymore. I can I went out, it was a couple weeks ago to ski with my daughter who lives out in Denver, and we went to, a couple of resorts there, Steamboat and so forth. And it was just wonderful. And three of us, the whole time, I was able to go home and, and I could check my emails, make sure there wasn't anything
Nothing
urgent,
blowing up. Yep.
nothing blowing up. And so and I was there, I could talk to the client if that was the case. And knowing that I had a team, that, could take care of I say the mundane, obviously the negative term, but the little things like, service.
The everyday daily tasks. Yeah.
You got it. That I don't have to. It's off my plate now. And, we started this whole process. I remember you said, hey, look, all right. I remember it was actually a good client. We just made it a relatively nice sale. And the irony part of it, again, 9-10 years ago, was like, this was mid-50s. I was like, Mark, I'm 1 foot out this door.
Yeah.
Out this, and you looked at me like, what are you telling me? A nice sale, And I said, yeah. I said, but all the stuff that we have to do. I said, we need to build a team, so forth. So you said, and you said, sincerely say, look, all right, let's do that. Let's break off. Let's start our own practice. We're probably going to take financially one step backwards because we have to hire some people, full-time staff to do the things that we shared or, didn't have to pay for, before through agencies and so forth. And we built that practice up, and I was willing at the time, say, all right, I'm 55, I can do this, because my goal is really to kind of retire at 50, 60, but let's say I get to 65 where I can, and here we are today where I feel comfortable that, hey, God forbid, the big guy in the sky said, you're done for, for this lifetime, that they're in good shape. At the same time, getting back to what I can do, the pleasure part is that now we can now travel, we can go away, and I don't have that worry, that stress that, oh, shoot, I got to get back to the office.
Yeah. I wrote a blog a while back, and it said that traveling makes me a better advisor. And some of my friends would just laugh. But the reality of it is we spend so much time trying to educate and provide a culture of a professional team so people feel like they're well looked after. And realize that it's not just, you don't need just Jeff, you don't need just Mark. There's, you have Jesse and you have Nicole and you have Keegan and there's other people that can probably help you through it. There's some things that have to come back to you and I, but not everything has to do that. And the reason was because when you had the ability to step away, even when I was traveling internationally, I still had the ability to check emails, check some of those stuff and be in touch in case something happens.
Yeah.
But as I step away, that gives you the ability to kind of refresh, look at things differently. So when you come back, you can be focused.
Right.
And I know that there might be somebody who listens to this and says, well, Chappie's only working 4 hours a day. And it's like, it's not about the time you work. It's about the work that you do.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are definitely weeks where I start with phone calls at 7 a.m. and then I'm still on the phone at 8 o'clock at night.
Right.
And then there's other weeks where, I'm spending maybe half as much time because it's the middle of July and most of our clients are on vacation and the last thing they want to do is get a call from their financial advisor, right?
Exactly.
If the market's relatively stable, if the stuff that's kind of going through, they don't need to necessarily talk to us every single time. So what we've been trying to do is build a practice that's scalable, but when people call in, they don't feel like they're part of this big machine, right? They feel like they're still part of us and they can know who we are by name.
Yep.
But we have to build some efficiencies to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, and on that note, part of technology and so forth is the phone calls that come to the office. They go right to our phone, our cell phone now. So we're in touch with them all the time.
Yeah.
People might say, "Well, geez, you're on vacation. Do you really pick up the phone call?" It's like, yeah. I said, because clients, calling and there's something that I need to take care of. It's one thing. Again, it's a service item that I can, pass it off to our team and let the client know that it'll be taken care of and they'll appreciate that. But at the same time, I want them to know that I'm available 24/7, so to speak. Okay, I'm in the middle of the night. I'm not going to answer the phone, but
Right.
and that has to do with technology. So it's a wonderful thing, that makes our life a lot easier. And anybody that's any sort of advisory standpoint, necessarily the client at this stage, once you've built the relationship up and so forth, they just want to hear from you. They don't necessarily have to see you in person. They just want to hear that you're still out there.
Yeah.
In the past, when we were pre-fee based, when it was commission based, I was grinding to get new sales. So I sometimes inadvertently neglected the existing clients, because it's like, hey, made the sale. Not to say, I want to continue to be in touch, but didn't have to. Didn't have that fiduciary responsibility and so forth. I had to review things all, at least on an annual basis and so forth. So now it's kind of flipped where I'm, they hear from me probably more often than they ever have.
Yeah.
And yet I'm technically working time-wise half the time, okay, than I used to. And they're like, geez, I hear more, if I have clients say, Jeff, we don't need to get together and review. Everything's good,
Right.
and so forth. I said, all right, well, look, I still got to talk to you. Did anything change on your side?
Sure.
Because that will, give me some inclination as to what maybe we should change the allocations to your investments or your insurances. Do you really need it or not? And this and that. So they appreciate that, and with that, and if they want to see my mug, and yet they don't want to travel, and we try and give them that. Jesse does a great job for our scheduling our annual reviews, or at least our annual reviews with our clients, and we give them the options. Hey, do you want to come into the office, the barn? If they're local. Do you want us to do a virtual, Zoom Teams meeting, where you can see face to face, or just the old school call, phone call. But either way, they appreciate that, that hey, that we're keeping in touch with them rather than them reaching out saying, hey, I used to get the calls was like, hey, I haven't heard from you in years.
Yeah, making an effort. Right.
Yeah, making an effort.
Yeah.
And
well, tell me about our team, because I could probably talk for a while about it, but
right.
Over time, one of the things I was always focused on. And I probably have a little bit more responsibility with the team than you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
But, we both engage with them on a daily basis. We have 3 ladies now that we work with, and I could honestly say, and I can say this because none of them will get to this far in the podcast. We'll see if they listen to it this far. I can honestly tell you that we probably have the best team that we've ever had.
Yep.
We've had other people on the team who are great.
Yep.
But the 3 folks that we have, they really work well together, whether they know it or not. They have very different skill sets.
Right.
And we're continuing to work to develop them to make sure that they have the ability to develop however they want to,
right.
Whether they're comfortable in the role or want the role to change or grow or stay the same. And there's seasons in life, right? Like the 3 ladies, it was kind of interesting. It's, Jesse's in her 20s. Keegan's almost in her 30s. Nicole's almost in her 40s,
right.
And then I just started my 50s.
Right.
You're in your 60s. So we've got this
got
generation, we've got all the decade cover.
Yep.
But somebody who's in their mid-20s sees the world differently.
Oh,
There's a lot of things that change in their lives that's different than yours and mine.
Yep.
And then your 30s brings in something different, and your 40s bring something different.
Yep.
So tell me about the team and the culture and the process, and what do you think about it?
Wonderful, and I promised him. I said, "Hey, I will say nothing but good things, positive things, but so nothing negative." And I say it sincerely. So we developed a team, so forth. I still, for first 25, 30 years of my career, 25 years of my career, did everything myself, from servicing, mundane things like address change on a client, things like that. So it was, for me, the transition in having somebody else do that and giving that up and make sure they did it right and so forth, to a point where, and Nicole will kind of smile if she does listen to this, say, like, Jeff, I'll take care of it. Okay, you don't have to keep asking me 3 times it wasn't taken care of.
Yeah.
So that was more on me. It was just, giving up the control, because I want to make sure it gets done, and so forth. Now, fast forward to this whole team and Keegan, came on board to take the place of Anita, who retired, who's wonderful. We loved Anita and still do, and so forth. We're happy that she did retire, from standpoint, because she would get some personal time, so forth, with a new love of her life. But at the same time, Keegan came in fresh, exuberant in her 20s. She had already had worked with a financial advisor. She understood the practice. She was licensed, so she was really good. So she came in, already running versus having to spend the time to have her teach teach her the business. And so she's been great, very efficient. Nicole, phenomenal. Okay, I mean Nicole more from part time. Remember, she was, I think she was retired from hired to or furloughed from her wife, I believe. And long story short, she was like just part time working at home as she's rearing her first child. Now she has two beautiful kids, and she then morphed from like 15 hours a week, I remember, at most, to all of a sudden she's putting in 40 hours a week. And is our now is our practice manager, where she can oversees a lot of stuff, and she's very good. So, and then Jesse, came on scheduling. That was the other thing part. It's like, all right, well, look, she's going to do a lot of our marketing behind the scenes and so forth, and put stuff together. It's in scheduling appointments. Again, that was something I used to always do. I'll call them, and then you said, oh, like, fine, but I remember after about 6 months or a year of just seeing her schedule your things out, so all that time and effort to make the phone call, the appointment, and so forth, you didn't have to worry about it, and she was doing a great job. And I finally realized, I gotta change.
I gotta jump on this.
I gotta jump on this. Because, what am I doing? Great. It was, to your point, practice started with Monday morning, or you had a list of phone calls of people you had to meet, and then you try to book out. You spent Monday agency meetings in the morning, what's the latest update in the industry and news and so forth. And then it was just spending your time Monday, not really even the appointments, it's just getting appointments for the rest of the week. And, I tried to do it where I always, in my practice, try to always keep some personal time, to your point, so a little focused, to keep Friday afternoons open. Unless it was a dire straight, a client that needed to see me at that time, so forth, then I would book it. But otherwise, I kept that open. That was my PR.
It was my personal time. That was golf time.
Yeah, whether it be skiing in the winter time, or golfing in the summertime, or just relax, or we're winding up, catch up some stuff. Okay, Friday afternoons was open. So this day it still is. And I said it to Jesse's schedule. It's like, all right, Monday mornings and Friday afternoons, don't book anything unless you really have to. And let's keep it consolidated. And done a great job. So I love the fact that these ladies have done a great job as freeing my time up. Or, I mean, again, I reflect back to, some old advisors where literally they, spent 90% of their twilight years in their very successful careers doing service work. And 10% of the time doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is advising clients and this
building relationships.
Because they had the time to do it. I don't. I remember looking at it, I was 45, 50. I don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
I looked up to them. They were my mentors in this business, knowledgeable, but I could just see the grind, and they were just like, this is not worth it. I want to be where
you'd go to their desks and they'd have stacks of files that they'd have to be flipping through.
I mean, we went through that. That segues into we were getting ready to buy this office, this building, and so forth, and then with the thought that then we will go on our own independent and start our own practice up. And you said, all right, well, look, we're going digital, and I'm like, digital? What do you mean digital? These files are gone. What do you mean? The guy, you reference them, And then you made a good point. How many times do you go to a file, to look something up? And if it does, and sometimes it can take you half an hour to find that little note or piece of paper that's in this file this thick.
Yeah.
But that was the old school because we had to. We have
it.
Digital. Okay, so you did a good job of dragging me into the 21st century, and me being comfortable with it. And it took a couple of years. Okay,
sure.
I was kicking and screaming sometimes, like, I still need my files, and so you forced me to, which was good, to purge, a lot of stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
We accumulate a lot of stuff, and all of a sudden you realize, you look at it, it's like, am I ever really going to look at that stuff again? And if not, it's gone,
Yeah.
So we did that, I remember filling recycle bins of, files and shrinking this down to here. And then we still kept them just in case. And probably in the 4 full years plus that we've been, independent, I probably had to reference these files 3 times, 3 different files. So,
Yeah.
because we scan the important things that are important into the system.
Yep.
So we could reference and get some information, basic information that you need. But the rest of it was like again, the world of technology now and so forth is streamlined. It's our offices are very clean. I don't have the stacks of files. I'm not the the advisor.
No.
I still have some stuff there,
Sure.
on desk, but that's just the day-to-day stuff. I clean it up and so forth and get off my desk, and that's why we can have an open office. We have to have closed offices because that was before you had these closed offices and you just shut the door and lock it because you had a lot of important
personal
information,
sitting
personal
there.
information.
Yeah.
And if the cleaning lady walks in there, she could,
Yeah.
so you had to worry about that. And I remember that was a concern of clients, like, where's all the information here? Where you guys hiding
Yeah.
and so forth. So everything's now into a secure cloud and so forth, and that's a nice part. So getting back to the team, I think they're wonderful. They make my life a lot easier. They contact me when I absolutely need to be contacted. Otherwise, they pretty much take care of it. They've learned that where to go to get the answer and so forth. And so it's a godsend. And it's made it's had life a lot easier, where I can continue to do this. And to be able to do something, because hey, I can come to work and get something done at the same time, feel good about it. Because do I really want to retire? My wife doesn't want me to, and
Yeah.
she'll tell you and everybody else, when's Jeff going to retire? Well, Jeff's not going to retire. What do you mean I'm not going to retire? You're not going to retire.
Yeah. She doesn't want you home every day.
She doesn't want. She's very independent. She likes her
Yeah.
space. She has been for the last 34 years. Our kids, we're empty nesters, have been for last 10, 12 years. We have 2 wonderful daughters. They're very independent themselves. One's in Denver and one's in London now working. But my point is that, and then it's just the 2 of us, and we're able to get our time back together to when it was just the 2 of us before we even had kids and raising kids. So it's kind of a full circle thing, and it's refreshing that we can still laugh and enjoy each other. But at the same time, she's like, I don't want you around all the time, So
Not every day.
not
all day.
every day, and vice versa. Because the few times I have stayed home. COVID was a perfect example, where we all were, society globally were forced to stay home. And kiddingly, but sincerely, she would, realize that. She will do. You can go in the office because technically we are an essential business.
Yeah. Financial, business.
Financial,
Yeah.
which was like we can do it from our home, especially with the technology. Zoom and Teams was available. It was working, people could entrust it and use it. So I say, hey, honey, so 2 to 3 days a week, I'd be doing my reviews in my, home office, converted bedroom into home office and doing the meetings on computer and so forth. And she's like, well, all right, are you going to be home tonight? I said, yes. All right. So all of a sudden it's kind of funny, like 9 o'clock, I have a Zoom meeting. I hear the garage door opening up. There she is. She's
Driving out. Got some errands to do.
It's like, things to do, get away. But, all in all, kidding aside, it goes. This is a business that I can, again, as I said earlier, if I can continue to mentally understand and so forth, and be up to date what's going on and so forth. I could do this until mid 70s, but again, at some point in time, you're gonna like say, I'm done with responsibility or concern about the clients that they passed on. They're comfortable. And we talked about this. You may at some point, in our decision to maybe say, hey, there's a certain client, they really want to talk to you. So, and I get something to do, something to look forward to. Because with that, my time will probably be spent, volunteering, doing stuff. Because I'm just a type of personality, that I'm not going to sit around and just watch TV and Netflix all day long.
And you can't physically play golf every single day.
No, I proved that.
Hurts,
You've seen me. I start, my back starts going. So.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. As much as I love the activities and so forth, every day, no. I'm like every other day. So what are they doing those every other days? All right, hanging out with my lovely wife and going shopping. That's where, hey, that's what you can be able to see. Hey, I can still continue, talk to the client,
provide value.
Provide value. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think realistically, one of the things that you said early on was learning to trust that somebody else can do things that you used to own, like you used to do.
Right.
So our team is a bunch of professional people. Some folks, every now and then somebody will say, well, I talked to your secretary or I talked to your admin. It's like, no, those ladies aren't secretaries. They're
Right.
not people just picking up the phone and writing down messages.
Right.
They are executing. They're helping us make decisions. They're helping us get from point A to point B.
Right.
So it's way more than that, right? The staff is really a critical part of the whole piece.
Right.
And giving up control, for me, it was a little easier because I was in the driver's seat of hiring and giving some of that
Right.
stuff.
Right.
But I think it's
And
very
you envisioned this. That was
and I
your
envisioned,
part
yeah,
of your plan is
yeah,
to,
it was
to
part
get
of the
that
whole
off your
plan.
table.
Yeah, is to get it off, to say, like to your point, I am not good at paperwork. I can't, like, once I get
Can't
to the
stand
end of
it.
paper, page 2, my mind starts to wander. I don't want to deal with it.
Right.
But there's folks who are good at it, and the issue is that if you put the ladies in charge of it, they will make sure the boxes are checked, and if it isn't checked, they'll fix it, rather than me having that stress to deal with something. Sometimes we have people who call us, and all they want to do is talk to somebody on the team.
Yeah.
What's the value of my account? What's going on here?
Exactly.
Well, if the ladies can do that, that allows me to be in a position where I can do the things that I'm best at.
Right.
So we're trying to organize that team so Nicole, Keegan, and Jesse can focus on the things that they're really good at, and you and I can focus at the things we're good
Exactly.
at. And then the stress that comes to any of us, we manage a little bit differently because we have different responsibilities, but we're all there to back each other up. That trusting another person with your business is very hard,
Right.
right? And mostly it comes out of the fact that you care about the clients. And when they said, Jeffrey, will you help me do this? You said yes, you made a commitment. Now you're passing that commitment off to somebody
Exactly.
else.
The responsibility is still
Still with you.
with us to make
Yeah.
sure it gets done.
But we feel comfortable with that team
Right.
that's able to get that done because realistically what it is they care. So if you take our core values that are written on our website on what's important, like one of the cores is integrity. Like we want to make sure that we have integrity. So if Nicole or Keegan or Jesse commit to something on behalf of our team, we all commit to it. And if I commit to something, we all commit to it.
Exactly.
And doesn't mean we're perfect. It just means we do the right thing, and we're rowing in the same direction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it's we started Legacy Conversations, or I started Legacy Conversations a couple months ago, and with the idea to engage with people to educate and inspire and entertain.
Right.
It's not about financial advice, right? It's not
Right.
about any of that
Yeah.
type of stuff. It's just engaging with people. And obviously you were on the initial short list of coming, right? And I don't think this is the only time we'll do it. Maybe we'll have one about the goods and bads, highs and lows of the game of golf or something like that. We can spend an hour talking about
that. Could
that.
be a segmented part two. It's like
Part two,
4 hours. So,
Of that. We can tell stories there. But I've appreciated our partnership. I think I've probably learned as much or more than I've given to that partnership over the last several years. And I'm happy to be partnered with you and be partnered with our team. And, I can't really see you retiring, although I can see you coming in less. But,
Yep.
when that day comes, I'll call Catherine and say, today's the day. Today's the day, Catherine.
Time to pack up.
He's
and move
all
out.
yours.
It's all-
Yeah,
okay,
if you come in one day and your desk is not in that back corner,
Well, that's what,
there
and,
you go.
and that's what I saw comfortably, going back to, partnerships, get involved in, 2000, when you started working, at New England Financial and Larry Ships introducing us to, then working with you on cases and so forth. And I realized, all right, he's pretty knowledgeable. He's my resource guy, like, Mark, how does this work again? I understood the 30,000-foot overview
the concept.
That's all clients for, 95% of them. That's all, you start, I sometimes just start diving deep into under the hood or into the weeds of details. Is more of my building my self-confidence. Hey, it sounds like I really know what I'm talking about, and I am. I wasn't just BSing the client. If I knew it, I'd tell them. But then I'd lose them. I could see in their eyes, like, all right, you had me at, sounds good, and now you're losing me to what I think about. So you're good as far as putting that together. And I saw that, and then the organizational skills. So I saw that's something that I wasn't the greatest at, and so forth. So I was willing to work with you on that. They're like, you're good as far as setting these things up and so forth, and the organization, the team, the building, and all that. I was really just client orientated, in a relationship building, and I remember, working with you initially and take this the right way. Is that, like Mike, your personality. I mean, you're kind of quiet. So we interject and say things are factual or good, but loosen up a little bit. And I think it was one of those things where I could talk all day long to the point where probably bore people to death. And so I think that's what Larry kind of saw as that good combination. The two different things, but you both can work well together. I knew people to get in front of and so forth, and that you were good at the factual stuff and so forth. And as I've seen over the years, we both kind of morphed, intercross, right? Become more detailed, probably than I need to be. And you are, I go on appointments now where I was the one that kind of opened up, get the client loose, how's your family, how's your golf game? We talked for 20 minutes before we got into the business. And then we talked for maybe 10 minutes on the business, okay? And the clients appreciate it. Now I see the joint meetings we have where it's kind of flipped, where you're the one that's doing the talking.
No doubt.
And I'm sitting there and saying, all right, get to the point, Mark. Come on, we got another point we got to make, so forth.
Yeah.
So the funny part about it is I think we both kind of helped each other out, so forth. You've given me more the understanding of the analytics and what's right for the client, which I really appreciated that, because that's how I felt, rather than the company saying you got to sell this product, you got a certain amount of quota to keep your contract.
Yeah,
that's how we got.
Right.
I got into the business to sell X amount of dollars of this company's product. You're out the door. Okay, you don't have a contract anymore. And I just, always, did that. Okay, achieved, but that really wasn't my comfort level. It's like really spend the time and effort with the client, so forth, and what's right for them. And I think we've done a good job of that teaming together. So there's been times when butt heads, and I've even made comments here like, if you're my little brother, I think I'd punch you a couple of times. And you said, "Bring it on, old man." But we got through that and so forth. And I think we kind of learned from each other and so forth. And that is been in this business for now 30 years, right? Or close
25.
To 25. Okay, and that's why I felt comfortable too. Is that now I'm segueing. As we did go independent 4 years ago, but even prior to that, really, we started. When I think I talked to you out of, or it convinced you that, hey, sales management isn't everything. I remember you got into that part, and you were putting all this time and effort to try and get new advisors and so forth. And I think you even said, I think you wrote a speech on this where how they just literally they suck the energy right out of you, because and I could see in working with you on cases and so forth, it's like, Mark, you're wasting your talent. I said, you need to be out in front of people instead of, I mean, you're doing a good job here, but some people just can't be helped and so forth as far as advisors. So I feel good as far as I think I encourage you to say, let's start working together more often, and you did that, and we worked again with another advisor in his practice, and then we finally said, let's just do this on our own and so forth. So I feel good that the one little thing I can say is I can encourage you to say, do what's, you're just good at being kind of a leader of team, so forth. And I'm willing to say, hey, look, and I've always told you that, look, as a partner and so forth, silent partner, if you want to say that. I said, if you do something that I don't think it's right, I'm going to let you know.
Tell me.
Yeah. I'm not going to just go along with it, okay, and so forth. At the same time, we've done that, but I said, I think what we encourage is like, hey, we've always had that understanding that let's do what's best for the client. And I think that's where we were on common ground from day one that we met.
Right.
So from that, I appreciate it, our business relationship, and hopefully it'll continue for years to come. Yeah. Maybe decades.
Well, hopefully
Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers. Listen, as long as he doesn't go to one of my teams, I think that's great.
That's right. That's right, God. I know the Giants are talking about picking him up. It's like, God, don't do that.
Please don't.
Don't do it. Yeah. Please don't.
So, well, thanks, buddy.
Anyways, hey,
I appreciate it as ever.
Always.
We'll
continue it. So
we'll do it again.
All right.
Thanks,
Good.
buddy.
Good job.